Hello.
Hey there, how are you?
Good.
I didn't realize anyways, sorry about that.
How'd you get put in charge of this?
I have no idea. I was like, wait a minute, I'm the only one here. What's happening? That's all right. We go with the flow, right?
Right. Just fine to see Mike in the audience.
I am slowly moving people over. So sorry, people.
Hi.
Hey, Tim Bonfatti, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Well, thank you. Hey,
I
Tom.
was wondering what was happening there.
I had no, anyway.
You're like the chief cook and chef cook and bottle washer, huh?
How'd I get this? Okay.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, Tina. My apologies.
No worries.
Like Leo's screen as usual.
Yeah.
On the road today.
Very good.
You must be at the Mocha or the MMA.
Just
Thanks,
left Six
Anthony.
Flags.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm in. Greetings, all.
Hi, Larry. Sorry about that.
No, not to worry.
Was Owen not around anime?
I guess
I'm,
not.
I'm here, Mike. I just
Oh, there you are.
co-host.
Oh, there you are, Owen.
Hey, Owen.
My apologies. I completely dropped the ball on it.
No
That's all
worries.
right. It got opened.
Yep.
We have each other's back. All good. Okay, Steve. Do we need
Let's
to
see.
beam anyone else over?
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Oh, okay. I'm just scanning. No, I think we look good. Oh, Clay, sorry. Happy summer, all.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people are back to normal summers and a lot of people on vacation all of a sudden. All right, let me get attendance here. Anime.
Mike, I really like your background, by the way. That's great.
Thanks. I had to update it. Mike Weber is out. I see Leo. Yes, I see Leo. And Jeff is out. And we have Bob. And Steve. And Mike. Oh. Excuse me. All right, looks like we have a quorum, so we can go ahead and get started a little bit late. Thank you for your patience. I will go ahead and open the meeting of the Medfield Dale Street School Building Committee. I will read off Governor Baker's statement, if I can find it, bear with me. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Medfield Dale Street School Building Committee is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen or view this meeting while in progress may do so by following the instructions on the agenda and meeting notice. And just a reminder to all who are on that the meeting is being recorded. Okay. With that,
you might want to note, Mike, I think that this is also being conducted pursuant to the legislative extension of the permission to conduct these meetings by Zoom.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if there's a revised statement, but given that the legislature did extend that provision beyond the June 15th date, that should be noted for the record. All right. Lynn mentioned that she would be late, so I think Gina's gonna get us started with our agenda.
Yeah. So, well, good evening, everyone. So first on the agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes, and they were sent in the package this morning to everyone. So hopefully everyone had a chance to take a look at it. And if there's no comments, or if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. But if not, can we get a motion to approve them?
Hey, Gina, it's Walt. Can you just tag me as not attending for that meeting?
Okay, sure. Yeah,
I
sorry about that.
had to miss that one. So,
Okay. Yeah, I can change that.
thank you.
No problem.
And Gina, I would just note in 12 and 14,
Yeah.
I mean, I think those are, I was really asking questions to understand there, as opposed to stating that that's the fact. I was
Okay.
asking whether, I was sort of saying, is this the case, is the point, ask whether that is the case, however you put it, but I don't think I was stating that was the case. I was trying to understand from Lynn what it was, and then she got the answer in 15, so.
Okay. All right. So I'll read that over and make sure it's in the form of a question.
Yeah.
Sure. I can do that. Okay. Are there any other comments or questions anyone had?
And for me,
Okay.
would anyone like to make a motion
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes with those as corrected.
as amended?
I'll second it.
A second from Tom Erb. Run down the list. Mike Marcucci,
Yes.
Tim Bonfatti,
Yes,
Tom Erb,
Yes.
Walt Kincaid,
I'll abstain.
abstain. And Anna Mae O'Sheabrook,
Yes.
Leo Brown,
Yes.
and Mike Quinlan also votes yes.
Okay, good. So next on the agenda is the approval of the May invoices. And this too was sent in the package this morning. And this included Left Field's invoice number 21 for $5,000 and Arrow Street's invoice number 727390 for $62,000. So that makes a total of $67,000 for the month of May. Unless there's any questions, can we get a motion to approve those invoices as well?
What's the total spent, Gina, to date?
I'm sorry,
According to the summary, it's
I have to look that up.
86% or $863,875 if we approve these invoices spent to date.
Right, thanks, Mike.
Oh, motion to approve. I'll second that.
All right, so I have a motion from Tim and a second from Walt. Running down the list, Mike Marcucci,
Yes.
Tim Bonfatti,
Yes.
Tom Erb,
Yes.
Walt Kincaid,
Yes.
Anna Mae O'Sheabrook,
Yes.
Leo Brown,
Yes.
and Mike Quinlan also votes yes.
Okay, great. Great. So on the next thing on the agenda is the community forum petition enrollment discussion. So Mike, you want to take over to discuss that?
Yeah, so obviously we hosted a forum on the 13th, about 10 days ago. Wanted to bring that up for discussion amongst the committee tonight to see what the takeaways are. and discuss, how we move forward. I did, in case we got to it, I did put the vote on here as possible tonight if we wanted to take a vote on any actions regarding that. But basically, as was outlined in the community forum, we basically have two paths. The path that proceeds to a November vote, and then the alternative path, which would, lead to a whole series of items in terms of getting a letter to the MSBA asking for an extension and an additional delay and also design funds, etc. I don't know if we have that slide handy, but
We do. I can share my screen.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think I think Anna Mae or Gina, can you give me permission
I
to
got it.
share?
I got it. You should be all set
Or
now.
Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No problem. Oop. Okay, I'm just gonna make this presentation so you could see, and let me know if you need me to zoom in.
So path one, we've already eliminated, right? We already voted to extend the submission date for the schematic design package. Currently the path two and path three were the other alternatives. But before we get into the details, I wanted just to see from the SBC what their feelings were regarding the community forum, what the outcomes, what you heard, what you think. Maybe you have some thoughts about how we move forward. So wanted to see if anybody would like to chime in.
Well, I mean, I'll start if nobody else wants to.
Go ahead,
So
Tim.
first of all, I just want to say, I think Mike, having been in your shoes 20 plus years ago, standing up there for 3 hours and doing what you did you must have done back exercises, because I like at like less than your age, and I did it for like an hour and a half, and I was like, it's painful. So anyways, I thought you did a great job. It seems to me you went through all the issues. There was a robust discussion about them. I'm sure we're going to talk more about them tonight. I'm not sure. We're heading toward summer season that's going to be very different than last summer. And I think in that case is going to be more, people are going to be doing their own thing this summer quite a bit. We've done 2 pauses to this process to entertain community input, 2 2-month pauses. I don't know how many times we've extended the MSBA agreement, but it seems to me that doing another one first of all, I don't think anyone would attend another one of those community forums, or they'll be lightly attended because of the nature we're heading into, the season we're heading into, particularly this season. And I can't see where something will come up. Nothing came up out of that forum that changed, certainly my opinion, or there was no strikingly new information or anything. And it seems to me that we don't do ourselves any benefit toward this project, which is really why we're here, is to get a new school built for Medfield. So you can say you're for new schools, but this is why we're doing this process. We're trying to build a new school. To me, there's no benefit in extending the process much longer than any other project we've been involved in, when there's no new information that's going to unfold that'll change the direction of the project. So from my mind, I believe our goal is to try to prepare ourselves to have the best case and argument for the town to vote on, and hopefully present the best project possible to them. And I don't know why we wouldn't move forward tonight and do our part of the article that was passed at town meeting, which we have done, and pass on to school committee for their responsibility, and begin the process of making sure that we have the best project possible to present in front of the voters in the fall. So that's my, so obviously I believe we should, you know, I'm hoping we're going to move forward tonight and move this project forward in the best possible fashion.
Any other
Tim,
members?
Can I just ask a question about that, Tim?
Sure.
So that is as opposed to what? I mean, the last time we decided we were going to go towards the path 2, right, which is for the October 27, 2021 MSBA board approval, which would mean a submission sometime in late August. Is that right?
I believe that's the
I
schedule.
believe it's September, but
September. And so if we were to move from 2 to 3, I mean, sort of the drop dead move point would be sometime in August. Is that fair?
To drop dead, I don't, what do you mean by that, Mike?
If we were through the process, I mean, look, as I said before, I think our obligation with respect to the article at town meeting, consider the points raised in the article, kind of reevaluate, go back over the merits of the site selection decision, discuss amongst ourselves the pros and the cons of each site that we had before us, the 2 sites that are being considered, taking into account those points that were specifically raised in the article, and see if our judgment has changed. It sounds like your judgment hasn't changed at all, and that's fine. But the question I have is, what's magical about deciding that tonight versus deciding that in early August? I mean, it looked like from one of the things, and I apologize which schedule it was, that there were going to be public fora of some kind in July and August. And so, I mean, maybe nobody will attend those either. I just wonder why we wouldn't, you know, continue to entertain additional, not necessarily, I doubt there's going to be any genuinely new information, but entertain input and give people an additional opportunity to interact with us as we move along, since I don't think it's, based on the discussion last time, we don't advance anything faster by deciding that tonight versus in the middle of August, even if the decision is the same.
I mean, I think, you know, personally, for the speaking for me as a member of the school building committee, not being a member of the school committee anymore, if the school committee wants to undertake that sort of, what I would call, you know, if they want to go through that motion of doing public outreach in July, in the summer, post-COVID, when we know that there's no new information coming out, that's their call if they want to do that. I'm just saying, I don't think we need to do that. I don't see us needing to stand at a meeting that'll be, in my opinion, going to be sparsely attended and show no new information, so Mike can sit there for 3 hours and present the whole facts again. The last forum was well advertised, fairly well attended, actually, I think. And to me, I didn't hear anything different from what I've heard in previous forums come out of that forum. So I mean, you know, other than the political part of it, but I didn't hear any new substantive stuff come out of it. And so I'm speaking, you know, from my position as a member of the school building committee. If the school committee says they feel they need that sort of output, that's up to them. I'm not judging.
I mean, I could be wrong about it. I thought I saw something suggesting there would be community conversations in July and August. And so I guess if the view is that people are going to attend those,
I support those.
I don't see why they wouldn't attend one if we were going to. I mean, this seems to be the concern that people have.
I support the community conversations, which are basically, they have a topic every time. They're basically set up to explain the project and the decision making. You know, there are topics around sustainability. There are topics around 21st century education. There are topics around, you know, a number of factors that
tax impact.
So what was that, Mike?
Tax impact was another one.
Yep. I mean, there are I support doing the community conversations, and don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we shut the project down. I'm just saying this aspect of the project, to my mind, you know, there's a point where when you give enough, and we've given well over what at this point in my mind is 6 to 8 months of discussion around this issue. This is a point where, you know, the decision's been made, and if the public will have their chance to respond to that decision in October or November, whenever we pick a town meeting date. And, you know, I agree totally with the community conversations, by the way. I want to be clear. I think we should host those. They should be held and people can come, and they should, as much as possible, talk on the topic that's at hand. The decision now is whether we build a new school. It's not about where we put it. My opinion, and for me, that's not.
Right, but I think the reality is for at least some people, that is still going to be the decision, right? There are certainly people who would vote no on one location, who might vote yes on the other location, and vice versa, right? I think I don't know that the number of people in each location is the same, right? I mean, I'm certainly not a yes for a new school wherever we decide to put it.
I guess
right? And I'm not yet a yes on this project at the end, right? We have to see what the final project looks like, and then whether we ultimately move forward to recommend a yes or no with what comes at the end. So,
well, to be clear, I'm one member, and I'm expressing how I will vote on that issue if it comes up. If Mike calls the vote, if the rest of I'm going to support whatever the committee wants to do. I mean, I'm not like this is it sort of. I'm just saying that's how I feel. I don't believe the people that are not going to support a new school or don't want a new school are not going to change their mind between now and October and August when we submit. They're not going to change their mind. There's no new facts that are coming out. And so that's fine. We can do more about it. And to my mind, I'm a fairly efficient guy, and I believe in make sure there's enough process. And we at Compass, we dedicate a lot of time to making sure there's good process. And I think we've given, in my measurement, the process that's been held here and the Mike's willingness to engage in it has been exemplary. And I don't see the need. Now, again, it's one voice. There's other members of the committee, and there's also a school committee that has to make that decision. And I don't mind, moving in the direction that I believe basically in majority rule. That's kind of how I operate. And if that's the way it works, they can move forward. I'm just saying, there's a point where you talk about things a lot, and then there's a point where you have to make a decision when there's no more facts to be uncovered. And as a committee, that's where I stand, or for me as a member of the committee.
Mike Quinlan, just as a point of, just for the, in respect to the town meeting petition, is the school committee required to re-vote on any specific part of this, or is this an SBC only type of vote?
No, so I mean, the petition was a non-binding partition, but it is something that as an SBC, we decided to take up, thus slowing down the submission of the SD set. It was addressed specifically to the SBC and the school committee. I can't speak for the school committee, so that would be something to take up with Jess on how you would like to respond to that, or even if you would respond to that. My understanding is you're not required to. My advice would be it would be good to acknowledge and respond to it in some form or fashion. But that's for you and Anna Mae and Jess and Megan and Tim to take up.
Yeah, I know we intend to address it. I would just want to know if there was, any sort of subsequent sequence that had to occur, nope. As part of any kind of voting process in that. So just as this conversation unfolds, I just wanted to see what the responsibility of the school committee was, in particular to the petition.
I mean, that's the way I understand it. Unless I've got it wrong, I don't know. Christine is, I believe Christine's here. So unless I'm misunderstanding it, it's basically, it's non-binding, but we chose here as the SBC to evaluate the alternatives, which we have the schedule slide up here, what the alternative would look like if we were to readdress site selection. We held a community forum to hear more from the public. As far as, to Tim's point, I didn't hear anything new. It was all the topics that were included in that petition were topics that were discussed during site selection and discussed during the subsequent review with the selectmen in the fall. So it wasn't there wasn't anything new really to react to. So,
Oh, I agree with Tim about the the reviews, and hearing of the reviews, which are all warranted, especially with COVID over the time frame, and and making sure that we've exhausted all the avenues in this process. So I'm not questioning that by any stretch. It was more just of a if there was any requirements of point of order. For some sort of revote required by the, by the school committee. So, with that, that's, I agree with Tim as far as I don't feel it's going to change anything, but I also agree with Mike and MA that, communication, the continued communication is absolutely necessary. And I am assuming we intend to do so. And we obviously do not want to delay, we don't want to delay any further part of the process, just for all intents and purposes. There was a lot that came out in that forum and got rehashed and reviewed, and a lot of it refreshed a lot of my memory on some of the items that we went through painstakingly, particularly around the available parking spaces, the loss of an actual field in between Memorial and Dale, regardless of what happens, how we try to wedge a building on there. There would only be one available field for both schools to utilize. And still, I don't think there's enough adequate parking in there. So without knocking down a FAP center or something. So, just all those reviews. And then honestly, just when the real numbers got put up there around construction costs and the inflation of those year over year, compounded with the borrowing costs that would also increase in that time, and just the actual impact of that. Not only is the questioning of back and forth is, not only did it reinforce all the avenues we explored in this process, I feel like it reinforced them, because going back to redo would be an absolute, the cost us an extra, $5 to $8 million easy. I don't know. I just don't see, to Tim's point, I don't see that. But at the same time, educating as much as the community as possible, I think, is extremely important, because I think there was a lot of aha moments for people in that meeting, and then a lot of aha moments from people after that meeting who watched the video, and people who reached out to me saying, I kind of get it now. And so I think there's just, so that's my opinion on it. I agree with Tim. I also agree with Mike and the communication piece. But like I said, I have a full trust in the experience and the wisdom of the collective group of this SBC. So I'm interested to hear what everybody else has to think.
So my takeaway from the forum it was really fortified by the teachers. I was so impressed that they showed up en masse, and that they spoke so eloquently, in terms of why they would like it to be at Dale and the benefits they found. Really, it was their closing statement, and that resonated with me so much. And unfortunately, on the recording, it came out all fizzled. But I do remember, the teacher, her closing statement was, "Look at the pros and cons list, and can you please consider our desires?" Essentially, as in the teacher's desires, in terms of close proximity for collaboration, trainings, outdoor classrooms, etc., the benefits for special education. Those were compelling not new arguments, but it was just so powerful to hear their voice. And so for me, I would like to stay on a path that would get us to a school opening in September of 2024. And and those community conversations, just to clarify, that has a different kind of tone to, as Mike Quinlan clarified, the forum was to address, the petition, and the community conversations, again, is to focus on a topic. And although many people clear out of Medfield over the summer, there were folks who still want to stay engaged, and thankfully the state extended that we can still meet via Zoom. So, it was great that the forum had 140 attendees, more or less, between Medfield TV, YouTube, Facebook Live, and in person. So, and
Zoom, right?
and Zoom. Yeah, exactly. So I'd like to stay on a path, ideally, that will keep us to September 24. And to reiterate what Leo had said about, we wait longer, it costs more. Thank you.
I pretty much agree with what Tim Bonfatti was much more articulate at explaining, and I agree. And I also agree that Mike did a great job for 3 hours just being up there. That was amazing. And I really think we just need to go. We're going to end up with a loss of momentum at this point. Also, if we don't continue, I think having informational sessions makes a lot of sense, but having more community forums sort of debating both sides of the school, I think it's just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, I think you're going to get that either way, Tom, right? Because I think
Right,
that's
we
what
are
the,
gonna
that's
get
what
that,
the
right.
debate will be about largely in the fall. So
Right. I mean, that's
that's what the discussion will continue to be about. So
right.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
Yeah, so Mike, I agree that the more opportunity you have to communicate, in this time frame that doesn't jeopardize the schedule, I think should be taken advantage of. I don't think another 3-hour community forum would be appropriate, but and I don't think it's a question of presenting an alternative from the school building committee. I think it's a re-emphasis of points. The recent, there was a kind of an ad hoc survey that was put out, and I think it just raises some questions that are in people's minds that have been addressed. And I think re-emphasizing that, I think maybe there's a meeting of the communications committee and maybe discussing that, but more of a targeted response, whether it's, people still talk about Dale Street reuse, and some of that's outside the specific purview perhaps of the school building committee, but these are questions that I think the opportunity to address the specific questions, and in my observation, 140 people doesn't sound like a lot, but it's, it hits a lot of people. And, if you see 5 or 10 people whose eyes get new information, I think that's a good thing. So if you have time between now and the process, I think taking advantage of it, because at least in terms of the optics, it shows that we are being respectful and considerate of people's concerns, without plowing the field as it were. That's just kind of my observation.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bob, that there's still plenty of communication to be done. I don't think anyone is trying to let off the gas. I think what we need to come to some conclusion on is, are we changing course or not? And in my mind, in looking at the items that were presented as part of that petition, like I mentioned, nothing was new that we didn't factor in. And I get that there's no perfect project. There's no pros and cons where one project is all pros and the other is all cons. I think this committee took a very deliberative process to review all aspects of each project, of each site, excuse me. And yes, there are plenty of citizens that may not be fully familiar with how we came to that conclusion. And that's what I think we spent a lot of time trying to get people there a couple of Sundays ago for that reason. I don't think that, I'm certainly not proposing letting off the gas in terms of communications, but what I'm more interested in is that sooner or later we need to make a decision right? We made a decision in the fall. The selectmen asked us to do more community forums. We did that. We extended that. The selectmen ultimately supported that decision. And then the petition came about in the spring and we, postponed it, looked for any new information. Nothing new came out of that. So, in my mind, I don't see a reason to keep pursuing the notion that we're going to go back to a Dale Street option. That's my opinion. I'm speaking solely for myself in that regard, because I feel like we've put together and have spent a lot of time looking at all of the concerns, looking at all of the issues on both sides. And I believe that we've put forth the best option, and we continue to tweak that and in preparation for the potential fall town meeting. And in my mind, reevaluating the site is not something, that I think is in the best interest of the community at large. I recognize fully that there are people that disagree with me, and that, there's always going to be people on either side that are going to disagree with us one way or the other. But I don't see any clear picture that, one particular site would somehow pass, unanimously or in a majority easily versus the other. I believe that, we evaluated the site in a very logical sense. We went through a lot of different processes. We looked at it from, a cost perspective, from an educational perspective, from a community perspective. I personally stand by, the vote and the decision that I made in the fall. What I guess what I'm asking is, at what point does this become, this is no longer multiple choice, right? We sooner or later, we have to come to a decision and present the project, and the town has to vote yes or no. And, we recognize that there's some that are going to vote yes and some that are going to vote no, and what that percentage is will ultimately decide whether that's successful or not. I just don't know what continuing, more forums on site selection on decisions that were made almost a year ago is going to benefit the town, that we've been talking about that same site selections from, for over a year. And I guess so, my inkling right now is to, make a decision, move forward, that we're going to proceed with the wheel lock option. And that we will continue to present all the information and all the facts on that decision and why we think it's the best option, and that the town should support it in the fall.
Well, Mike, I can truly say that I feel like anybody else who goes through the same process is going to end up at the same conclusion, with the same specifications, and with the same concerns. Let's not forget we shrunk the scope of this project as well from 3 grades to 2 in that reevaluation process, in the process of taking all the considerations, at hand. And I think that may, limit us in the future as a part of that decision. But at the same time, I feel at the same as you that, going through the process of evaluating the site, taking emotion for the site out of the equation, just as a functional and instructional educational site that's best for the students and the learners of Medfield, which is what the school committee is here to do. We are here to make sure that we can, provide the best public education to our learners, and create the best ecosystem for them to go through our grades K to 5, and exploring some of these, some of these crazy options. I just can't, in all right, in some of the options that we'll put out there, the possibility of not just squeezing the building onto the site, but trying to place students. I don't know where we're going to put the students, if we're tearing down a building and putting one on top of it. I just, some of the ideas that have been tossed out there are just off the table for me. Our kids just went through 18 months of disruption to their education. There is no way that I could say we're going to put all those same kids through another 2 years of disruption of being housed in a gymnasium somewhere for 2 years while we build a new building. So, you know, and to take another 18 months to go and figure that out and spend another $750,000 and not to mention the increase in the interest rate and the increase of construction costs on top of that, I think it's fiscally irresponsible for us to entertain that idea and throw away the work we've already done. So, and I that's how I feel about it. And I speak for myself, and I am a member of the school committee, and I will go back and if there's any questions from my fellow school committee members, I will say it exactly the same. So I'll be quiet now. Sorry.
So Mike, I had a couple of points, and I'm not going to deal with the tactical questions that we've focused on so far. You know, I think a couple of things. First, I think absolutely our obligation is to ultimately make a substantive recommendation. It's not to try to count noses and figure out what will pass, what won't pass. And I disagree that our goal is to get a school, right? Our goal is to have a new school if that is what is in the best long-term interest of the town. And I don't think one new school is as good as another new school. And so I think we can't get locked into the notion that we're definitely getting a new school. It can't be we definitely are doing a 70 million project ever, right? There's always got to make sense on its own, not just because the time has come up. And I don't think we should be trying to game out this survey versus that survey, this imperfect measure of public opinion. This person said this, everybody I talked to said this. We have to make a substantive recommendation about what our best judgment is. You know, obviously, if we knew it was 90% against, then it would be pointless. But there simply isn't the data to make a nose counting recommendation on the idea that we're going to try to game this out and find the path of least resistance. I mean, the project is too significant and too important to make anything other than a recommendation based on our best judgment of having looked at it. I will say on the substance of the decision, and I've tried to step back from this, and it was actually aided by some of Tim's neighbors during a meeting on another issue on Monday that sort of reminded me of this part of this process, to kind of just step back from this decision, which obviously I've made the vote I made and supported it, and based on the information at the time, thought it was the right judgment. But to try to think about this sort of on the what are the trade-offs? What are the differing approaches here, stepping back from the specifics of each thing? Because I think we did go through the points in the article, and we can address some of them in the substantive discussion here. But I think we've got a couple of both trade-offs and sort of different framings of the issue. I think one thing that has kind of crystallized for me on the educational point of it is we have sort of something of a back and forth of, on one side, what I would call an internal or a professional educator's view of the school. And then the other, which is sort of an external and community experience of the school. And that it's striking that when we look at the educational plan that was developed over a long period of time, that obviously drove a lot of the design and the site selection, most of the things we're looking at are internal things, how the school actually functions day to day, how education actually works, which grades actually fit together, how the teachers are actually moving between the buildings, what the issues are for the kids inside the school. And most of those kind of professional educators' recommendations and internal recommendations are somewhat opaque unless your own kid has had the particular experience. And so for people who sort of downplay some of the benefits for some of the kids who are in a more vulnerable position, may not have had a kid in that position, or may not have had a kid who had that issue, or may have had a different experience. And then on the other side, you have sort of the external, right? The good memories that people have of walking from Dale Street to the center of town, the added activity it brings on those half days to the town, the good memories that people have of going there. And I think the natural desire to keep a good thing going. And the reality is, in a school system like ours, where most people are relatively content with the schools and relatively content with the education, most of the people who come through it, I think, probably have a positive memory of that, and they associate it with different things. And so they'll associate a lot of those positive memories with Dale Street, that particular school, that particular location. And I think some of the disconnect here is that internal versus external, right? That professional educator's recommendation versus that experience. And I don't downplay either of them. I mean, experience matters. Parents are ultimately responsible for their kids' education. And so those kind of judgments about those external benefits and the experience people have matter. But I think some of this disconnect we have is on that issue. And I think that the judgment that the committee made is that internal or professional educator's recommendation is also kind of mediated through the school committee, ultimately carried the day as to which was more important, which is not to say that those positive experiences were wrong, or that people who say that it was a big part of their experience to walk uptown were wrong. It's just that in looking forward for the next 50 to 75 years, the benefits, and maybe it'll be the, maybe for 60% of the kids, there's not a real difference, right? But for 40% of the kids, 30% of the kids, some percentage of the kids will really benefit from all of those enhancements that happen, right? All the improvements to education, the improvements to the experience for teachers. So that's what I see as one of these trade-off, one of these vectors of kind of disagreement on it. The second is sort of the conflict between certainty and flexibility, right? This comes up most dramatically in the discussion of what we're going to do with the Dale Street building, right? There are people who are concerned, well, we're going to be left with this building, and they want a certain answer. And so if we tear the building down and build a new building there, well, we have an answer, right? That building is gone, it is certain. On the other side of the equation, you have flexibility, right? You have multiple options, but with any sort of flexibility comes a measure of uncertainty. And this is similar. I think the most similar decision we made along this lines, which was much more consequential than this in terms of the liability. I mean, the liability of having an empty Dale Street school to tear it down is $2 million. We bought the hospital property with a $25 million liability for the building and no plan at what we're going to do, right? We ultimately, I think as a town, concluded that the flexibility, the ability to control that property outweighed that $25 million cost and those risks, and went ahead with it. And I've really been spending the last 7 years trying to ultimately come to a consensus about what to do with it. But I think it's a decision we had to make under a degree of uncertainty. And the same thing is here. And we can see it, right? It's easier to see that that empty building is there. This is obviously something that I was a big factor in my judgment originally, that if we do build at Dale Street, we are locking ourselves into 3 elementary schools. And so we are locking ourselves into having to replace, renovate, spend a significant amount of money on Wheelock within the lifetime of these bonds. Now, maybe that's 10 years from now, maybe it's 20 years from now. You can't predict with complete certainty, but it's almost certain that we're not going to be able to fit all of our elementary school kids on that Dale/Memorial campus. And so if the Wheelock school needs to be renovated in some way, we're going to have to make a substantial investment. Whereas, if this building were built at Wheelock, I think we'd have a real possibility that when Wheelock has come to the end of its useful life, you could resolve that issue depending on the enrollment at the time, with an addition to Memorial and having a K-2 at that location and a 3 to 5 elsewhere. So, but again, that introduces a measure of uncertainty into the mix. That benefit of flexibility is uncertain. And then you also have this issue of kind of unknown costs versus known costs, right? And this relates to the reuse of the building as well. You can say, well, we have these known costs of a slightly higher expense of the Wheelock building, but then we also have other unknown costs, right? So if you take away that flexibility for the Dale reuse, and and the FAF Center comes to the end of its safe life, you're faced with a situation where you have to face the cost either of no park and rec building, because we don't replace it, or the cost of a new park and rec building. Whereas you have the unknown possibility with the added flexibility, if we are able to reuse it, of potentially postponing that and reducing those costs in the future. And you also take away some of those future costs. If we were to stay at Dale, we'll somehow have to deal with the stormwater and other issues with the Wheelock site, which would be a further expense, but that's not currently in there. And then to cut this on the last two, and I apologize for taking a lot of time on this, but one issue is obviously the traffic. And that's one of those. There's going to be increased traffic in the Elm Street neighborhood as a result of this, right? How bad it is, how much it is, how well it is mitigated, one way or the other, it's going to be higher. And as we look at any project that we do of any kind, there's almost none that has an equal impact on every single neighborhood in the town. And so you're always weighing the benefits to the town collectively against the particular impacts. And I think that's one of those impacts that we can't write off. And so that's one you just sort of put in the con category for that neighborhood because of the different traffic pattern there. And then the question is, is it outweighed by the other benefits? And the last thing is just the water, kind of the focus on the water issue. And I think, we have not taken an approach to town of sort of a zero risk to water under any circumstances. But if that were the case, we'd probably build nothing. And I don't think there's a real case to say, well, if we're taking a zero risk factor, there's a real argument for building in the Charles River Watershed Aquifer Protection District instead of the Neponset River Watershed Aquifer Protection District. And Christine, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot more of our water presently comes from that Charles River Watershed that the Dale Street School is in. Aquifer Protection District. So, I think that's another one. You can never eliminate that risk entirely, but the rules for building in those areas, the regulations for building in those areas, I think at some point we have to trust the regulators who develop those rules and the engineers who develop the workarounds for them and the protections to it. And I came down to the conclusion that it's probably equally risky or equally safe, however you choose to build ultimately in either location, with the added benefit by correcting the parking lot issues at Wheelock, that you reduce some of the water and the runoff. So I think as I think about the decision is, how do you weigh those various pieces, right? If you want the absolute lowest cost option, frankly, we'd be going with some version of the base repair, right? We wouldn't be building a new school at all, and that'd be less expensive to the town. But assuming we're building a new school, if we just decided to save $2 or $3 million by picking the absolute cheapest option at Dale, you're then giving up a lot of those other benefits for Wheelock. So that's kind of how, as I tried to go back through this, could I get myself, I try to do this professionally as well. When you've come to one conclusion, to try to see the other side of it. Can you get yourself to the other side of the issue? How would that look like? How would you articulate it? And I think in weighing those costs, I understand why people would weigh them differently for different reasons. I understand why some people might favor one side of that or the other. I don't think that I've heard a convincing case that I ought to weigh them differently than we have. But I understand why people ultimately do when we come to it, apart from just sort of the particular considerations that people may have that are kind of apart from these sort of broader considerations that apply to everyone. So that's kind of how I tried to think through it. And I am curious if anyone else has a view kind of on weighing some of those different vectors, weighing some of those benefits against the others. And I will just say at the end, I did think putting up the pros and cons thing was helpful again. And I did want to make sure that Gus Murby got appropriate credit for that, as he was the one who I think originally put that together. I don't know if you're going to get some sort of claim for royalties, Mike, from him on that, but I did want to make sure that Gus was properly credited for the pros and cons. So I'll shut up at this point, but that was, as I was trying to work through this over the past couple of days and sort of absorb kind of what I've read and heard, that's kind of how I thought through the various things to be weighed and the various perspectives to take into account.
Thanks, Mike. Any other thoughts, or anybody have a reaction to anything that Mike put in?
Mike, I just like to say that, the way that Mike presented that and articulates it as he does, I think it reflects the process where you're at today. And while each one of you in your voting, I'm not a voter in this case, but each one of you in your voting went through that process, and somehow conveying that in some form of communication is, I think, really important, because we're in a period, nationally and locally, of trust. And I think the way that Mike articulated this reflects the process that each one of you has gone through. Because I observe these meetings. I don't vote, but I observe them. And I think it's really important to somehow be able to articulate the way that this has been measured, because, in the past it's been presented of, this has been jammed down our throats, et cetera, et cetera. And, I guess, I don't know how to articulate it. I wouldn't articulate it better than that, but I think the salient points that Mike points out, and the pros and the cons and the measures, and it's not a black and white issue, but it's a measured, informed decision on the part of the building committee that was endorsed by the selectmen and the in the school committee, if that can be continue to be conveyed, and I think just for the good of the town, that trust concept is presented and improved, I think it has great value.
Thanks, Bob. Anyone have any other thoughts to share?
The one thing I'd like to add is that, at the very beginning, school committee, we're really hoping for the 3-4-5 school. And we believe that was the best route. But because of circumstances with COVID, expenses, the limitations of taxpayers, etc., we made a pivot, because it was the right thing to do. We still believe, or I still believe, I should say, that Wheelock is the best place. I do have an attachment to Dale. All 4 of my children went to Dale. They all rode bikes there, and I get that sentimental piece of it that so many are attached to. I can absolutely empathize with that. But then, to Mike's point about the process of this, and really, what is better? Dale works, but I believe that Wheelock works better. And in terms of the future flexibility for this town, perhaps, I've heard talk about, full day kindergarten being mandatory. That's not in the immediate horizon, but it may happen, and we may have to do something with Memorial to expand, to accommodate that. And so I just think, thinking short term, long term, just Wheelock works better for me. And but I understand. But I also just wanted to mention that the pivot that we did make, that we haven't been so, headstrong with 3-4-5, and that we are considering the impact to everyone, or we're trying to do our very best with the information that we have. So that's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Walt, any thoughts? You've been quiet tonight. I know you weren't at the forum, but
Yeah, sorry, I missed the forum. I did attend the town meeting though. I can't attempt to communicate as eloquently as a lot of these people, but I do remain in favor of Wheelock. I think a lot of this debate has reinforced my decision as well. I think it's the best value for the town. I think it's the best educational solution, and I do think the Wheelock improvements are important to that site as well as part of this project. So I'm in favor of moving it along. I can't comment on whether we should wait until midsummer or not, but I do know we've spent a lot of resources to get to where we are, and I don't think we should be in a holding pattern. I think our resources should be focused on hammering out the Wheelock site, right, and getting it the right project for the school, for the town rather. So I'm in favor of the Wheelock spot as well. Remain in favor.
So obviously, thank you everybody for your thoughts. I admittedly didn't have a clear picture in my mind of what the process would be tonight, but I guess my general feel just personally is that we should move this along, that we should take a position on the petition and move forward. But I don't know if I'm certainly open if people disagree, but I personally don't see, again, because I haven't seen any new convincing data why we should reverse course at this point. And I believe we've spent plenty of time on this topic. And I believe we've digested everything that we've heard from the community. And I know that, we're being told that we're not listening, I would disagree with that assessment. I would say we are listening. We just may disagree. And we fully recognize that this decision is going to have, as Mike put it, differing impacts on different parts of town. You know, that said, I'm hearing a lot of people here tonight that have heard the same things I've heard, and remain confident that you know, the decision we made in the fall still stands true. Go ahead, Leo.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think you reminded me of something that's actually very point. You know, many of us have received emails and letters over the last few weeks, obviously since town meeting, and you know, you've done a great job in responding to many of them that were addressed to all of us. I have tried to have personal conversations with people, and and just to hear the conversations back and forth. I think that's part of the communication piece too, that I think is important. I think there's a lot of noise out there that's causing some confusion, of course, and I don't think we need to review that, but I think that that is the one thing that I'd like to to those who are listening today, and I know that others on the board can echo this on this committee, that we are reviewing particularly the ones about walking to school, sidewalks, just reviewing where the sidewalks are. As a matter of fact, I found a missing sidewalk that's on our sidewalk plan, by the way. So there is a sidewalk on the street that's marked as not having one. Because I actually drove those areas and walked those areas to review some of those concerns that were raised, and to echo what Mike Marcucci was saying about traffic. Yeah, there's going to be changes in traffic for sure. There is an ongoing those of us with kids in the elementary system, it's multiple drops that happen. I think those patterns will adjust. I'm not necessarily sure how much of a spike they might be, but if people have once they have both their kids out of first grade, it'll be one stop instead of two, and those kinds of patterns that will change, and the different patterns from MAP and so on. So I think that, bearing all those, I think that will be change, and that, and we'll adjust accordingly. So I do want to echo those concerns. So sorry to cut you off on that, but I think you reminded me about the feedback and I wanted to make sure that for those who are listening and here attending these meetings and who do attend these meetings, that they're not falling on deaf ears, and the opportunities to talk to us still remain as well. So.
I do want to add one more thing, Mike, if I could.
Absolutely.
Which, I hate lingering these conversations on with adders, but I think Mike made some very good points, Mike Marcucci. And I think everyone did. I think Anna May did, and other people, that particularly the people that are on elected boards. I think, we look at the reasons why we support these things, and you look at long-term, you look at basically we're on these boards to try to do what's in the long-term interest of the town, right? As much as possible, filter out our own biases and, potential to sort of make that judgment distorted because of that. And so, when you look at this project, there's the educational benefits, and then there's the long-term planning benefits for the town. To my mind, there's no question about the educational benefits of the Wheelock site. I think that's, and I don't think we've really heard anything different than that. So I think that's pretty clear. If you look at the long-term benefits site planning wise, I always felt, and even early on, that if there was a feasible and implementable ad reno that kept Dale Street School as an asset to the town, because I do believe that building is an asset to the town. We don't have that many historical buildings with, and they do create the fabric that lasts for a while. I would have been in favor of that. It became clear that the ad reno option would have been very disruptive and I think unfair to a generation of kids that, the school would have been basically impacted at least probably 2 generations of kids through that school, two cycles of kids. So, you know, when you look at the new option, it's quite clear to me that the new option on that parcel of land is a very poor site planning decision to put that kind of a building sandwiched in between the two structures of Memorial and Dale. And we would have had to have done something about replacing that baseball field. Nobody's talked about that, just sort of been left out there, but it would have had to happen on all our projects. You know what happens when you take over a field? They get replaced in the footprint of the building that you've taken over, the building that you demolish. So that's what happens when you try to relocate fields in most of the typical projects. So, you know, the site planning for that project in Dale, to me, is atrocious as a new school on that small little parcel. The second thing is on the site planning aspect is, you know, when people talk about the traffic, and I get it, there's no way we can say here that there won't be more traffic. We will see more traffic at Wheelock. But, you know, I've been working in this business for a long time. I know professionals work with traffic. Over time, you begin to develop new traffic attitudes. I live in Copperwood Road. The only way we get out of Copperwood Road is we go up the top and we take a left or a right on Hospital Road. You know, our traffic, I know, is going to be impacted by what they do at the hospital. There's no question when you add that housing. But I've helped support the options at the housing. I've worked with that committee on providing them professional opinions on cost and everything. Because I trust the professionals to figure out a way to make it work in a way that's bearable. I know it's not going to be perfect. I know it's not going to be great, but it's going to be bearable. So I think that, you know, when you look at the long-term interest, you look at a lot more than just what sort of the immediate impact of, you know, whether walking to town is more difficult from one place or another. Everybody adapts over time to that basic pattern. And I think that the other point about Dale is Dale offers, I happen to like the Dale Street School building. I think as I've said this a number of times, so I like it. I'd like to preserve it, at least the 1941 portion. And that building offers opportunities for us with other departments that we don't have right now. For Park and Rec, it offers opportunities for the Council on Aging if they chose to access that space, they all need space, both of those departments. And I think that, you know, so when I look at the long-term planning for the town, and it's cost neutral, when you really look at replacing the baseball field, it's cost neutral. And so I look at that and I say, to me, in the long-term interest of the town, you know, there's no question why we made the decision we made, and nothing we heard of told us something different than that. So when we went to the community forum in reaction to the town meeting vote, the very close town meeting vote, but we appropriately, I think, responded to it and held that community forum, and we had well-attended community forum. I think it would be, I think, generous to say that there was no consensus came out of it. Nothing in that forum said to me that the town says we're moving in the wrong direction. It didn't come out of that forum, which is the whole purpose of having that response to the article. So I feel like, back to where I started with, I don't know why we would continue this process of collecting input on something that I can't see any new facts coming out that is going to change what is the benefit in the long term for the town, either educationally or long-term site planning and sort of suburban planning. So that's how, and I don't see any potential for changing that. And I think it is time. I agree completely. We need to keep communicating. I'll participate in every one of those community forums that come up, the community conversations, and be part of it and start explaining all the different and answer the questions around the different aspects that come up around the school. And that's what we need to do. We need to start to educate people of why we're doing what the school is about. And a new school for Medfield, which has been on our long-range plan for a long time, is an appropriate thing to move forward with. And that's how I believe. And that's my last comment on it.
So Mike, is there a vote?
Well, no one's made a motion. I don't know if anyone feels moved.
Hey, Mike, there were a couple of comments. I think Chris was looking for clarification on a couple of things.
So Statement from Chris McHugh Potts, you already voted SBC meeting to pursue path 2. Just wondering how this vote would be any different than last time. Please elaborate. So the way we voted at our last SBC was to postpone the SD submission such that if we do proceed with path 2, that we would be in place to be able to do that. And so we took the gas off the submission, but we didn't necessarily take path 3 off the table. So that is why I brought this discussion up tonight, was whether, based on what we saw at the community forum, whether there was any interest in still keeping path 3 on the table. So I hope that explains it.
So the vote you're seeking is to remove path 3?
Well, I don't know. People can make a motion if they so choose, but I guess I believe that this committee needs to take a stance one way or the other, and maybe it's tonight, maybe it's not, but that's why I'm opening it up. That we need to take a stance that we're sticking with the Wheelock decision that we made, or are we, going another direction? That was what the petition is asking us to do. And I think that as a committee, we need to publicly decide whether we're going to take that stance one way or the other. And I would like to formalize that. I personally would like to formalize that with a vote. Now, if people aren't comfortable with that tonight, then we can table it. But as I've noted, and some others have noted, I don't know that there's new information. So I guess my question would be, why wouldn't we vote on it tonight? I'm certainly open-minded about that, but.
Well, I'll make a motion. Do we move forward? I get confused with the paths, but we move forward with path 2. And it can get seconded and debated, and that's the best way to put it on the table.
I would second that.
Do you want to answer the other questions in the chat first, Mike, or do you want to just move ahead?
If they're relevant
questions,
discussion, let me. So again, please put your name and address into, if you have a question. Sorry, I should have stated that at the beginning, but that's sort of standard for public meetings. I have a second question from Chris McHugh Potts. When, if at all, will public input be taken? Please advise. Also, please let us know number of attendees tonight. We have 35 attendees tonight. And then in terms of public input, we typically take that at the end. I think we do have some other business to get through, but if the committee feels like we should take some public input, I'm okay with that. So I don't know if anybody has any strong feelings on that.
I mean, I think if the input relates to the site selection, now would be the time to do it, as opposed to at the end. If people intend to take a vote on it, it's probably best to do it now.
Yep. Again, just a reminder, please put your name and address, full name and address, as we would at a normal public meeting. I know we're on Zoom, but. Okay, so I have a question from Eileen Murphy, 5 Meta Comment. I guess it's not a question. It says, I am hearing all references about traffic strictly pertaining to school drop-off and pickup. South Street is a significant access road to 109 and 95/128. I'm not sure about the question. We understand that it's a cut through for some people. I don't know that we can change that from a town perspective. It's certainly not why this committee was formed. So we do look at the impacts during drop off and pickup, because that is when the schools will see increased traffic in that neighborhood. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything to that.
maybe Tim or Mike, I mean, do two schools typically have increased traffic other than at times when people are coming and going from the school? I just don't know what's typical for school traffic patterns.
I mean, well, I mean, I'm not a traffic engineer, and maybe somebody from left field or Arrow Street can help with this, but in my mind, the traffic occurs when there's school pickups or school events, something that's school related. I mean, there's no driver to a school beyond the school itself that I'm aware of.
The Wheelock site will continue to have the soccer fields there, which will garner its own traffic. I don't think it'll diminish at all.
I would say typically traffic patterns are a little funny. The morning drop off is usually more compressed. The afternoon pickup is less compressed because some people get there early, some arrive late. Some students stay late after school. The afternoon impact is usually people who are waiting, trying to find a place to pull their car over and park while they wait for their students. You might have a occasional evening event that draws a lot of traffic. That might be similar, but most of the time it's just that morning pickup, morning drop off, and afternoon pickup where we see any impact on the local traffic.
All right, next question from Jeff Hyman. One meta comment: at any time in the process, was a concept, design, or sketch for a Dale Street option ever presented to the SBC? All right, so yes, Jeff, there were actually many options designed and presented. Tim referred to a few of those. We looked at, I forget the exact number, maybe Larry or Tina, you have it, but we looked at overall on the project, we probably looked at somewhere in the teens, mid to upper teens, total number of options. Those were subsequently narrowed down when we went to just a 4 to 5 school instead of evaluating the 3 to 5. Once we made that decision, that cut a lot of it in half. And ultimately, we narrowed it down to 2 new options at Dale, 2 new options at Wheelock, and the ad reno scheme at Dale were the 5 that we had it narrowed down to. We ultimately chose the option that we did. Anyone else from the board have any comment on that? Or committee, sorry, committee. Okay, not hearing any. I will move to the next question. Do you think you should allow more time for community input before you vote? Michael Metzler, 41 Phillip Street. I think we've talked a lot about that, Mr. Metzler. We've had, we're closing in on, it's certainly more than 2 years. I think we're on 2.5 years total since this whole process started. And we've held community forums. We've slowed the project down when COVID happened. We delayed the project again in the fall for more community input when the site selection was made. And then we've subsequently again made a decision to slow the project down and get more community input, which we got at our last community forum. So, you know, at some point, we unfortunately have to make a decision and move forward because we have a limited window right now currently with the MSBA to put a project forth that gets to a vote. Now they may be willing to entertain more extensions, which is what we explored with Path 3. And then the committee needs to take a position on that, which I do still currently have a motion in a second on, but I will continue to try to answer questions. Does anyone else have any comment for Mr. Metzler? All right, not hearing any. Next up, Karen Scotty, 26 North Meadows Road. Question is the ultimate purpose of a new school at the Wheelock site to consolidate K to 5 in one location? And if so, when do you see an end date for this? That's not my understanding. I know there has been discussion about this project when we were looking at a 3 to 5. There was the potential that if we did proceed with a 3 to 5, that we could potentially eventually create a 2-school model instead of a 3-school model, where we would have a lower elementary and an upper elementary. That right now is not on the table if we see enrollment growth that's being projected. If that enrollment growth doesn't materialize or decreases, you know, to Mike Marcucci's point, there might be the potential to, when the, you know, 10 or 20 or so years from now, when the Wheelock building becomes towards the end of its useful life, there might be the potential of doing that with an addition memorial, depending on where enrollment numbers are. But as far as I know, in any conversations I've had with the district or with the school committee, there's never been a concept of putting an entire K through 5 in one location. And Leo or Anna Mae, I'd look to you to see if you had any input from a school committee perspective.
Not unless we had a drastic enrollment drop, we wouldn't be able to do that. When we did have the proposal of a 3-grade school at Wheelock, we were hopeful for a pre-KK program at Memorial, predicting the expansion of K and additional, you know, with the push for pre-K, additional pre-K as well, and then having a 2 through 5 program. No, I mean 1 through 5 program at the Wheelock site, but due to, you know, our decision to scale back that particular site, but we do feel that there could be possibilities for that. You know, again, if the enrollment increase does not go as high and even drops a little, we might be able to still do that. Again, you know, reflecting on what Anna Mae said earlier, and it was again taken into consideration. You know, and select board member Marcucci had made a very excellent point during those conversations, and I remember them vividly, because it does give us that flexibility to possibly do that if our enrollment does drop. So.
All right. Follow-up question from Elaine Murphy. The traffic study will not be done again, correct? Actually, there will be an additional traffic study work done if the project gets approved in the fall. So that would be in the next phase. Additional traffic study would definitely still be done. Tom Tate, 3 White Street, in light of now more accurate reduced enrollment numbers expected for fall of 2021, will the SBC request a clarification of their stated mission? I'm not sure what that, I think what you're getting at is based on the enrollment numbers for this year, would we request a change to the enrollment that we're projecting for the school, or that the MSBA projected for the school? And in my mind, I don't see the benefit of that. I've looked at it from the perspective of, if we were to look at this school and say, you know, we wanted to cut classrooms. We've got 2 grades here. So if we looked at potentially reducing the enrollment by 2 classrooms or 4 classrooms, which are fairly big cuts, especially when you get to 4, what is the benefit? And what are we losing in that regard? And in my mind, it's a relatively small benefit from a cost perspective. And what we're losing is future flexibility. What we've seen.
But I would say, Mike, though, that this is not necessarily germane though to site selection, because the enrollment's going to be the same wherever the site is.
Yep.
I mean, if we're taking comments on site selection, the enrollment is kind of separate
that's a good
from
point.
that. So that's a separate discussion. The enrollment's going to be the same whether the school is built at Dale, Wheelock, the hospital, in my backyard, wherever else.
Yeah, no, that's a fair statement. All right. Next question I have is from Steve Ganem, 1 Cross Street. And he says, bear with me. My specific concern is that Phillip Street, Cross Street, and the majority of Elm Street do not have sidewalks. I personally have experienced very dangerous encounters with vehicles on each of these roads with traveling at excessive speeds or with distracted drivers. These issues continue to this very day. Any student living in those areas would be unable to travel to school by foot or bike without parental supervision. When raised with the SBC, my concerns have largely been dismissed. The proposed traffic mitigation efforts do not address these safety concerns. The other feedback from the SBC has been that my safety concerns are not the responsibility of the SBC to address, since it has to do with public roadways. I find this unacceptable, since it is the SBC who are pushing for a school at this new location. It is your job to look at all the factors of that location, including the safety of walkers and bikers. Please be responsive on this question. While I will disagree with you on one thing, we have absolutely taken safety into a factor. It's been part of our discussion throughout the entire site selection process in the fall. We have never said that it's not our responsibility. And we have plenty of meetings that document that. Matter of fact, as Leo did, I drove both sites looking at sidewalks, and I documented that in a sketch that's been put up as part of the community forum and other community forums. So I certainly am aware that not every street in that neighborhood has a sidewalk, including Cross and Phillip, has been noted multiple times. And there's also, plenty of streets in the Dale Street neighborhood that also don't have sidewalks, including Adams Street, just to the north of Memorial School, and that whole neighborhood does not have sidewalks. So these things were definitely factored into our decision. And I recognize that you may disagree with that, but it was absolutely something that I took seriously, and I believe that this committee took seriously. And it is something that we will continue to study. If we proceed with this, again, we'll do additional traffic studies. We put money aside for traffic mitigation. We will be doing off-site work at the intersections and along Elm Street to try to make it the safest possible location for a school. And I know that also that the Chief Garrett discussed this at length at the community forum as well, about what her concerns or other concerns that she didn't feel were necessary at both sites that she addressed. So I will respectfully disagree with you that we have not taken that into our decision making. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts or comments on that. Okay, hold on. Trying to find ones that are relevant to site selection. All right, I have Jeanette Hasapides, 27 Plain Street. If Dale Street School is to be used for Parks and Rec, would it not still need major renovations to take that on? And if so, who would pay for it? And if it is designated for Parks and Rec, does the size of our town need such a large building space? Have either of these considerations been investigated? We've addressed this a little bit tonight. Parks and Rec, we're looking at the Dale Street School for potentially for Parks and Rec, but we've talked about other uses as well. As Tim mentioned, COA, the town has other needs. It will need major renovations in order to keep that as an asset. But that doesn't go away if we chose to keep the school there. We would still need to address the Parks and Rec issue. And as Mike Marcucci pointed out, that would mean either building a new building for them or potentially not having Parks and Rec at all as the alternative. So those things were investigated. They were part of our decision-making process. We are still working on what the short and long-term look of that may be for the Dale Street School. But as others have mentioned, I still believe that that can be an asset to the town and provide us with a lot of future flexibility to address many needs.
Right. If I could address a couple of things on this too, Mike. I mean, I think the thing to keep in mind about it is that it's great for, well and good for us to say, here's what we're going to do with the Dale Street building. I mean, until the school committee decides they don't need it anymore, it's under the care, custody, and control and responsibility of the school committee. So I don't anticipate the school committee still needing it in September of 2024, but who knows what other mandates may come down from the state that would require additional school space. So before we, as I am as guilty as anyone of speculating about how that can be used to save us some money in the short term after this process is done. But that's the first thing the school committee will have to decide, is they don't need it anymore if they can declare it surplus and turn it back over to the town. Assuming they do that, I think what we do with it and how we address it ultimately depends on what it's going to cost to do with it, right? I mean, I would never favor putting $18 million into that building. I mean, if that's what it costs to make it useful, I think then we just simply demolish it if it's in that bad a shape. I mean, I think my hope is, in an effort to push another new building down the road further, is that if we can keep it in reasonably safe shape and acceptable shape without a major investment for that 5 to 10 year period after the kids move into the new school, we'd be able to use it as a bridge option. That would be an upgrade on the FAF Center, but less expensive to the town than building the financial cost of building a new building, or the cost to our programming of not having a Parks and Rec building, which are sort of the two alternatives you would have without the ability to use that. But that does depend on where things stand in September of 2024. We can't predict precisely the condition of the building at that point, what the cost would be. And as Mike said, the building committee is looking at what a reasonable projection is for what those costs would be. I know from my perspective, whether we reuse it or would ultimately demolish it or significantly demolish it would depend on what those costs are. I mean, I think for myself, as I think about what the liability is of not having the certain resolution of that building now, it's the $2 million to demolish it, which is significantly less than the $11 million, which I think is the correct number that we're currently carrying for the Dale Street building if it remained a school, just in ordinary maintenance as part of our capital building maintenance plan. So if we do move into the new school, that liability that we carry in our capital plan of 11 million for the Dale building would go down, I think, to the required cost of the 2 million of demolition, depending on what is investigated and what the costs are going to be. I don't think we're going to spend any more to renovate that building than we would spend to build a new Park and Rec building. That's kind of my calculus. If you can push that Park and Rec decision off a little more, get them some more space, maybe get the part of the Council on Aging program some relief from their building, and then get some of these other bonds we're paying off. So the public safety building and the DPW garage, the hospital. I think the hospital rolls off in 2015. So we're not carrying all of those expenses or doing without a Parks and Rec building.
All right. Next question is from Carly Krolak, 70 Adams Street. Would this committee consider including specific budget line items in the proposal for leaving the Dale Street School building in a safe and usable condition for the other flexible uses that have been discussed? Specifically, given the serious concerns about the condition of the Dale Street School, how can the school committee abandon its responsibility for maintaining that building and expect Parks and Recs or the senior group will be able to take on that burden? So, not quite sure I fully understand this, but I will try to address, and I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in, but
I mean, I think it goes to what we just talked about. I mean, I think I mean, I don't think we need a specific, but if we wanted to include a specific budget item for demolition of that building in this bond, we could. So if we were to decide we're going to demolish it, or we want to put the money into the bond to demolish the building, we could include that fairly in the bond. Because the school is going to be occupied for the next 3 years, I don't think we're in a position to be including renovation funds, and we're not allowed to include maintenance funds for that building. We do have a capital building maintenance fund that's created and funded that we use for the maintenance of our buildings. And as I said earlier, what we do with that Dale Street building is going to depend on where things stand in 2024. I think it is potentially an asset. And in my view, it's a liability of $2 million for demolishing it, in the same way that the hospital property is an asset, and also a $25 million liability for demolishing those buildings, depending on which way you look at it. So I think the maintenance costs and all the rest of it, that would be factored in. It would replace the maintenance cost line item for the FAF Center. Because I think if we were able to move move Parks and Rec in there, it would involve demolition of the FAF Center. And so those expenses would come off. But if it's cost prohibitive to do that, then we likely will have to bid, at least most of that building, a fond farewell if it's going to be expensive to maintain. I think my hope is 3 years from now, it's in good enough shape for a Parks and Rec building and in better shape than the FAF Center, and avoids a major significant cost, another one in the near term, or simply doing without the building. And so And obviously, if the school committee needs it for a school, it's still going to be a school. I don't know what facts would lead in that direction, but you never know what's going to happen in the next 3 years. So I think the discussion of the reuse is kind of understanding that there are a range of options that are not that are reasonable, as opposed to being able to say today, here's absolutely what we're going to do with it. I mean, if somebody else came forward and said, I'd like to donate $20 million to the town to construct a brand new Parks and Rec building in some location, we might say yes to that and then decide not to move it to Dale Street, in which we have to find another plan. So, and if anyone out there wants to donate 20 million for a Parks and Rec building, you can contact Christine Truweiler.
I have my quick pick. Don't worry, Mike.
All right, follow-up question from Jeff Hyman, One Meta Comment. Beyond opponent pressure pertaining to a wheel-lock location, what challenges keep members of the SBC up at night? A couple of examples would be fine. It's an interesting question. It's the first time anyone's posed that to me that way.
Can I answer for me?
Yeah, please. Well, I'm thinking it through.
I will answer for me. The two are inflation and interest rates.
Those are two of mine too.
They're
Yeah,
completely out of our hands and would have a much more dramatic effect on the cost of this building than anything we're talking about now. So I would say if that is the biggest, I think we're still fine when I look, and I think we made the right decision to delay this project twice for further input and discussion and the rest of it. But I do have that concern that you look back on it, and if we're off by 6 months on the bonds, and I don't think we will be, but that could have a significant impact. So for me, inflation and interest rates are the two big things that I'm most concerned about with respect to this building.
I would echo those, Mike, definitely.
And yeah, I've already obviously spoken to that a number of times this evening. So yeah, I think that is absolutely what keeps me up. Absolutely.
Just one thing is the tax impact, to all our residents, this is a reality that we have to deal with, but I also empathize with folks who have gone through a really tough time. And so that's hard. That's hard. That's a hard reality.
I'll add just one thing. Like, I don't know if it necessarily keeps me up at night, but a lot of people have come to me over the last few months and asked me sort of why I do it. My kids won't see any benefit for this school. Why am I doing this? Why am I spending so much time on this project? And I could say, because I believe it's the right thing to do for the town. I believe that I got involved in the town to be able to lend my expertise in design and construction to try to make sure we're making smart decisions. I feel like I can do that. And what I'm afraid of, what keeps me up at night, has been on every project I've been involved with here in town, is that we make a decision that is based in a short-term view that really hurts us in a long-term view. I go back to the decision that we made as a town with the DPW, where people were concerned about cost. They voted down the project. It was voted through at the town meeting, but was voted down at the polls. The project went back into redesign. It was cut by 20% square footage, I believe. It might have been lower than that, 10 or 15% at least. And then a year later, it was bid, and this is again tied to inflation, but it was bid and priced up, and it came back the same price. That, to me, that kind of, it's hard when you're talking about this much money, that to think that a decision like that has multi-million-dollar repercussions over decades. Like the difference, as I think Bill Werner spoke to at the community forum, the difference in a half a point in interest rate means far more than, an additional $500,000 for a water line upgrade, or something like that. So I think we have to be cognizant of trying to make the best decision long-term. I believe that we need a school. I believe that we need the MSBA support to build that. And those are the types of things that are why I do this and why I support the decision that we made. But I'm sure there will be more things that will keep me up tonight between now and November, and then they'll change again. All right, follow-up question from Steve Ganem. Guess I didn't respond to his question the way he was looking for. So he wanted me to address what will be done to ensure the roads can be safe for walkers and bike riders. In terms of what would be changed for walkers and bike riders, right now we're looking at obviously the traffic mitigation at South and Elm, but also we're going to be evaluating all of the sidewalks along Elm Street to make sure that they are adequately safe. I know, I think you've brought up in the past, or maybe I'm confusing you with someone else, the potential to put in sidewalks on Cross and Phillip. And that is where we did say that it's a bigger discussion, because I believe there's reasons why that may not be possible. I would need to refer to the civil engineers and the DPW, because I think that they've evaluated that, if I remember correctly. But in the long term, I think the town is looking at all areas of town and with the sidewalk program and looking at areas for upgrades. What I can tell you is that based on the existing conditions that we've reviewed with the public safety officials here in town, they're in constant communication with us, and I'm sure if you have complaints, you should reach out to them as well, just to make sure that they're up to speed on what may be going on the roads close to you. But we can look at all sorts of things for traffic calming and other ways to slow down traffic along that, in consultation with our traffic engineer and with the police chief. So I hope that better answers it. If not, I apologize. All right. Looks like we have another question from Eileen Murphy. So none of you think putting 2 additional stop signs in the Elm Street intersection will have a negative impact on the regular commuter using South Street? In terms of additional time commuting on South Street, I don't know from a commuting perspective. Again, we're trying to look at this from the school perspective. And the traffic times don't necessarily overlap exactly. I know there is a little bit of overlap probably in the morning commute versus the afternoon commute, since schools are out, in the 2:30 range. So that doesn't necessarily overlap with the evening commute. But I can tell you that I know there's some residents that are concerned about speeds along South Street. So the stop signs would help that. In terms of, will it slow down a commute into Boston for an additional stop along the way? It will. I don't know how long. I'd need to look to a traffic engineer to tell me that, but I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on stop signs. All right.
I mean, I think as we've talked about it, Mike, I mean, and you and Tim or Eros, we can address the process. I mean, some of this mitigation issue is going to be an iterative process as you get experience with what's happening and things are adjusting to reality. And so, I don't know which pieces of the traffic mitigation are fixed in stone versus which ones are among the set of available options to traffic engineers, that here are things you can do depending on what you observe and what you see. And I think any one of those options may be used or not used, depending on what the actual experiences of people driving. At least that's what I've taken away from most of the traffic related discussions, is that you want to make sure you have a range of legitimate options, a range of acceptable alternatives and acceptable strategies that would work with the location. And then you have to adjust to the evidence and the experience, both that we'll gain over the course of the next 3 years. And then some of it is if the school ends up there, the experience of the school actually being there and how you adjust to the way people are adjusting, because people obviously adjust their traffic, and traffic is somewhat notoriously difficult to model in the abstract until you see how people actually go about their business, what percentage of people are on the buses, and how traffic patterns change as the drop-off patterns change.
So I know that based on when we reviewed that with the traffic engineer, and based on what we heard from the design team and taking all of that into account, we decided to proceed currently with the stop sign approach and the restriping of Elm Street, such that there would be turn lanes in both the left and right directions where Elm meets South, to be able to allow traffic to flow more freely onto South Street as opposed to getting clogged up. And then there is a discussion, there has been a fallback position of potentially doing a traffic signal that would operate really functionally only during pickup and drop off times, and other times would just be a blinking yellow on South and a blinking red on Elm. And the current belief, and anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, is that that expense would only be incurred if we felt it was necessary, that somehow the stop sign approach was not adequate. All right. And then and also Elaine Murphy, has the board discussed a proposed remedy if the vote fails this fall? Yes, we have. We have options if the vote fails. If the vote is close and the town decides, this committee and the Board of Selectmen decide that, you know, we can take another swing at it, maybe either convince some people to change their minds, or maybe do something in terms of possible small cost reductions that would make a difference, that don't affect the educational program or any of the function of the building. We could revote it within, I believe it's 120 days, right, Tim? The MSBA policy, yeah. Within 120 days. And so that would be one option. If the vote wasn't close, then we would need to, you know, go back to the MSBA. They have a failed vote policy. But just as a reminder that that revote, should it happen, has to be on the same project, the same site, the same size, et cetera. So we have discussed that, and we are aware of the implications. And then, you know, if the vote is not close, then it's almost certain that we would need to submit a new statement of interest to the MSBA to get back into the program at some future time. Or the other option is the town could choose to build a school on its own without the MSBA. Not an ideal option in my mind, but that's certainly an option. Okay, so I think those are the questions relevant to the site selection. And okay, coming in just under the wire, Chris McHugh Potts is asking to ask questions live via audio, all relevant to site selection. So bear with me for a moment. Chris, I'm going to ask you to make this expeditious. Yep. We're almost 2 hours in.
Yep.
And
I understand. If you can hear me, right? Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, I actually purposely waited to the end because I knew that there were probably other people that had questions. So I wanted to give them the chance to ask, since they probably didn't before. I think it's just, you know, I think there's one big question I have with regard to the path to. What would be the estimated date for the project scope and budget conference for that?
I don't think that's been scheduled, but it would have to be after our submission to the MSBA, and so that, I believe the submission is slated for September. Lynn, do you? I don't have the schedule in front of me.
I think there's one at the end of September and one in maybe around August 6th, but I can look it up real quick.
Okay. And I think that, you know, there were a couple comments made tonight with regard to, you know, that there's no new information, that, you know, in terms of no new facts coming out. But I would respectfully disagree with that, because I think that with the new cost projections, I think that alone, people are very, very confused about all the numbers that are floating out there. I mean, I was online going through documents that were used at meetings each meeting was within like 2 weeks of each other, and the numbers were different. And, you know, I just think that people are very, very confused about the costs, and it would be beneficial to have a public forum just on costs to help people understand the costs and really ask very specific questions to understand.
We do, just to respond to that, we do plan on doing at least one public forum, if not more, on cost and tax implications between now and November.
Okay, but I think it would be better to do it sooner than later, so that people have a better understanding of it.
No, completely understand that. It's on our agenda tonight to start the conversation on the schematic design estimates that are just recently published. So this body is just receiving those today, and we will digest them. We have some decisions to make on cost, and what we're going to turn into an overall project budget. So I'm sure this committee has just as many questions. So there will definitely be more discussion on cost. This is not intended to be the first or the last time we talk about it.
Okay, I just think it'll help you in the long run to help people understand the numbers. And I also think that it's just important that when we talk about, quote, a good process, that a good process, and I, you know, hats off again to I've said this before to Tim, you know, Compass, I've looked at some of the processes that Compass has followed in other towns. I think in particular, I think Wellesley was such a phenomenal example, because they actually took the site selection criteria and broke it down over a period of probably 6 meetings and chunked it for each one of those meetings where they actually got into specifics. And it allowed people within the public, if they wanted to come out and focus just on those small number of issues or questions. And, you know, I think that where we fell short is that we didn't have a public input, public engagement process before key votes. School committee voted on grade configuration on August 27th, and the SBC voted or attempted to vote on the site selection on September 9th. And there was not really a chance to, even with the school committee, to actually go into the educational benefits. School committee didn't talk about the ed plan in detail and did not talk about site selection.
Chris, I'm going to have to stop you. Is there a question? I mean, this is basically a statement.
Well, it's also
we're in a question and answer. If you have something specific you'd like to address, we recognize you've stated multiple times you disagree with our process. If you have a question, we need to move this meeting forward.
So I guess the question is, do you want a failed vote, or do you want a vote to pass? I guess that's the question. And if you want to vote to pass, then it's going to be important not to have a rubber stamp of a process, even going forward. You know, I mean, another question I have is, when will key documents going forward be made available?
Point of order, Mike. Point of order. Move this meeting.
It's a valid question. Because I would like to know when.
What was the question, Chris? Can you just specifically state the question that you have for us to address?
So when will, I think that it would be great to have the SBC make a commitment that before key documents get submitted to the MSBA, for example, to provide it to the public within a certain time frame, so that there's enough time for people to digest the information and ask you questions, and not have to worry about sort of being in a reactive mode to say, okay, well, the cost projections were just put on the website last night or today or yesterday, and now everybody's trying to dig into them and can't understand them because they weren't provided early enough for people to look at them.
So
sounds like a good future agenda item.
So I could tell you that before we submit any documents to the MSBA, the SBC will take it up in a public meeting, and there'll be public input allowed. They'll be made available to the public to digest. And then before this committee ultimately votes to submit those documents to the MSBA. So yes, that will absolutely be the case. The cost estimates that you're referring to have just been issued, but they're not finalized. These are documents that have been put together with the design team and with me specifically working with the design and OPM team to pull those documents together. They're being presented tonight here for the first time. So this committee, I'm sure, has just as many questions, but they're not finalized documents. They're not, we're not stating that there isn't an opportunity for anyone to have input on them tonight or in subsequent meetings. So there will absolutely be opportunity for the public to ask questions about costs as we develop them. But they're living, breathing documents, and they're not final. So this committee will be taking them up on multiple meetings as part of our agenda, as part of our normal agenda. And there'll be plenty of opportunity for the public to ask questions about that.
Okay.
So thank you for your questions. And
I just want just one quick follow-up question, because I just want to follow up on a question that was asked earlier about the enrollment projection. I know at the last.
Sorry, Chris, we're going to move on. We've talked about enrollment. We've talked about site selection. We're 2 hours in, and I just can't have this going on forever. We've got to move on to other business. So you're welcome to submit questions to any of us in writing. We're happy to respond to those. All right.
Question, Mike. I have a
yes, Leo.
Yeah, sure. Leo Bram, 249 South Street. The process of posting those documents and discussing them in open meetings, is that a new process that we're undertaking as this committee, or has that been the ongoing process?
Nope, that's been ongoing.
Just wanted to double check. Thanks.
All right, so turning it back to the committee, there is a motion and a second on the table. Any further discussion before I call a vote?
Can you just review the motion again?
I believe, Tim, you made the motion. Do you want to?
It was just to move forward with path 2 on the scenarios.
Sorry, I think you broke up a little, Tim, or at least I didn't hear.
I think the motion was to move forward with path 2 and to, I don't know what the word would be, but to, I guess, to recertify the site selection and move forward with path 2. Or I don't know what the right word is. It's 10 o'clock and I'm losing
9, yeah.
On meetings.
So,
so somebody can
motion,
clean up the motion. But
and I believe, Tom, you seconded.
I'll second it again, yeah.
Okay, again, any discussion before I call a vote? All right, not hearing any. Mike Marcucci?
So I think I'm just given the fact that no one else has any appetite to continue this, I'm a yes. I mean, I would probably defer this for a further meeting and continue the discussion, but I appreciate where everyone else is coming from. And I will say, in the discussion I've had, I don't think I've reweighed any of these things or have reason to reweigh, the factors before. So I think it's fine to move ahead at this point. And I understand where people are coming from. So I'm a yes.
Tim Bonfatti?
Yes.
Tom Erb?
Yes.
Walt Kincaid?
Yes.
Anna Mae O'Sheabrook?
Yes.
Leo Brem?
Yes.
And I will also vote yes. All right, so I know it's late. Is everybody okay continuing into our schematic design cost estimate? It's probably a good amount of discussion. It's a lot of information, so I don't want to proceed on this if
we should take up, since it's separate from site selection, we should take up the enrollment issue. It's on the agenda. Maybe we can defer it, but that's a separate
So
Point as
the
well.
enrollment discussion was part of the petition, right? Do you
Yes.
want to talk about something specific to that, Mike?
Well, it's not really a site selection issue. So I think we had talked about whether we ought to propose revisiting the enrollment projections as part of this process and request to the MSBA that they revisit the enrollment projections in light of in light of the information over the last 3 years that have come in substantially less than what was projected. And again, that's not really a site selection consideration because the enrollment is the same. We agreed on the enrollment in 2018 in this process. And so, I mean, I wanted to just raise that as the final point to discuss here. I know you expressed your view, Mike, in the course of the last discussion that you don't think we gain a lot from that. And I'm mindful of the example of the DPW garage where we made it smaller and it cost the same and all we had was less, right? And now we're trying to find a garage for the council on aging to park buses because they can't fit them in the garage, that if we had the extra bays from that 2011 building, we might not have to do it. So I think I don't know that we have to decide that tonight because it is something that is not dependent on site selection. It's going to be the same in either location. I do think we have to explore as part of this, if we're not going to make a request to revisit the numbers, I think, and it's really going to be a school committee issue to address what the options are under different scenarios, because I think it's a serious question to ask. Are you going to build a building that has 8 empty classrooms, right? And my expectation is that you wouldn't, that you have a nice new building, the school department would find a way to maximize the use of the nice new building within their education plan. And I realize it's 3 years away, but I do think that's something we'll have to take into account, what those options are for the use of the building under various enrollment scenarios. I think the specific point in the article was to request an enrollment that's the same as this current year. I don't think we should ever be assuming that everything that exists today is going to exist for the next 75 years. I'm happy to bet the under on anyone's enrollment projections, as I was 3 years ago when we were in the middle of the great class size panic of 2017, and everybody agreed that enrollment was just way too high and going way up, and we had to deal with it. I was happy to take the under then, and I'm happy to continue to take it. But I'm no more infallible than anyone else, and so I just wanted to raise that, and maybe we take that up at a different meeting because it really is a separate question from site selection. And whether anyone wanted to do anything about it. Yeah.
Comment on that, Mike?
Yes, please.
So, and I was one who felt that we should, and we've had informal discussions with the MSBA around this issue of the enrollment, which, they've been willing to say if we want to propose additional new information from when they made the calculations that they made around the enrollment projection, they would consider them. Having been through that process on other projects, I can tell you that time frame is not quick. I mean, and plus now they're fully engaged in their August board meeting prep. So if we were to do something, we would want to do it soon. If not this meeting, we'd certainly want to do it definitely by the next meeting, if not an interim one, because we would need to react to it very quickly. In thinking about this further, however, and I want to also pass on to you something that's happening on one of our clients' projects. So, we have had the issue where we have had a disagreement with the MSBA, or our enrollment projections are less. I don't know the order of magnitude, but and it's not you can't make a direct reduction by just saying, there's 20 kids in the class, we have 80 kids less, that's 4 less classrooms. It doesn't work that way. There's a scheduling aspect to it, and there's more to it than that. So the reduction would need to make sense from a scheduling standpoint. We would only be talking about reducing classrooms. We wouldn't be talking about reducing common space. That would be, I think, very short-sighted to build less shared spaces or special spaces. Essentially it would have to be in sort of block of either 2 or 4, I think, and even 2 would be awkward. I think Larry and Tina and the Arrow Street crowd would say that would make for an awkward reduction in the building. But we'd also be talking about perilously coming close to I think, a short-sighted way to look at our future. And the story I want to relay to everybody is that we recently completed the Hopkinton Marathon Elementary School, which is their K, Hopkinton, as many of you know, has the same grade configuration sort of school system as we do. They have an early pre-K to 1 and then 2, 3, 4, 5. And we did the pre-K to 1, the marathon school. And during the middle of construction, now Hopkinton had always asked for more. They could see more enrollment coming, and the MSBA pushed back and said, we're not giving it to you. And in the middle of construction, when we had the foundations ongoing, we could see that there clearly was going to be a problem when the school opened. And we petitioned the MSBA. They worked very quickly to work with Hopkinton and allowed them to add 4 extra classrooms to that building. They didn't increase the grant. They basically said, you can allow 4 extra classrooms at your own cost. And so we were able to accomplish it. It was quite a feat actually by all the project team involved to do that. And it was opened on time. They have now just gone out with an OPM RFP to add 4 more classrooms to the Marathon Elementary School, of which they will pay full boat on that. Obviously, there's no MSBA involvement. So the Hopkinton example is
3 years later.
3 years later. Yes, that's true. So yeah, 3 years later. So, you know, Hopkinton built, now there they actually were saying we want more enrollment. So to some extent, I think the MSBA probably should have listened to them or reanalyzed it back when they had requested it. But even when they requested it, they weren't requesting near what they see as numbers now. So Hopkinton has its own demographic issues and its own open, space utilization that causes things. And I think every town's different. But Hopkinton and Medfield are very close in terms of attractiveness of school systems. It's a school system that we on the school committee, when I was on it, and the school department uses as a peer school and a peer community in many ways. So I think it would be very short-sighted to pass up the grant money available to us now to basically say to the MSBA, we want less grant money to build a smaller school because we're concerned about, our enrollment. I think that the magnitude of the difference, if we decided to take 2 classrooms off, that would equate to maybe 3,000, at the most 3,000 square feet of space. And, that would be less than $2 million. And so I have frankly changed my mind because I was of the opinion we should pursue, or at least review the idea of we have different information and inputs now into the enrollment process to see whether or not we should change it. I now believe we shouldn't pursue it because, first of all, we would be taking less of a grant, and I think that there is a lot for the relatively small savings. There's a lot of long-term benefit to having that flexibility around the school. So just speaking for me, I no longer want to pursue, because we would have to decide that soon if we're trying to accomplish that in this cycle in the schedule we're trying to accomplish. And I don't feel it's the wise move to make.
And Tim, just to be clear, I don't necessarily disagree. I just think as we think going forward, and again, when we talk about what the range of options are going to be, depending on circumstances we don't control, and how Hopkinton's development experience has been a lot more different than Medfield's as well. I think Hopkinton over the last 10 years has been more like Medfield between 1960 and 1980 than Medfield between 2000 and 2020 in terms of the volume of single family housing development that's been done in Hopkinton compared to here. But point's taken, and I think that's just something we'll have to think about, and the school committee have to think about, just in understanding what it means that we're not really proposing to build a building that will have lots of empty and unutilized space for a long period of time. That there's ways to make use of it in a way that's beneficial, educationally beneficial to the kids, and that's adaptable, right? This is sort of a common theme of mine, is the adaptability and flexibility, as opposed to boxing us into making future decisions for the town unwittingly in the future. So I just wanted to raise it to complete that topic. So thank you.
Okay, so I think, again, running kind of late tonight, but did just want to review, if possible, if you guys can hang with us for a little bit, the schematic design estimates and a list of recommendations for some cost reductions that the design team, OPM team, and I put together in conjunction with Jeff as well, got his input. It's a lot of information, so recognizing we may not get through all of it tonight, we can talk about future agenda items, but in the interest of trying to give some direction to the design team and OPM team who've been very patient with our discussion tonight, you know, is everybody willing to take maybe another half hour to get through that, or are we going to lose people?
I'm happy to do it, Mike.
All right.
I've got many other great places to go right now, but there's no place I'd rather be.
All right, well, let's try to do this quick. I appreciate everybody's time and as well all the public that are listening in. So you have the presentation handy. Put that back up.
I do.
Thanks.
Put that back up.
And while she's doing that, Mike, I think maybe the thing to do at this point of the night is we'll review things in general and try to figure out another time if people have more detailed questions, particularly about the VE discussions.
Yeah.
Because if we were to go down that rabbit hole, we might not get out until the morning.
Right. I recently went through that with my client in Ashland, where we actually had 3 SBC meetings, all that were upwards of 3 hours. So recognizing how that sausage making, as we call it, can get lengthy.
Yeah, and I think at this point, given that we are really not submitting until, you know, trying to wrap things up until August, there's not a strong reason that we have to plow through this
Sure.
in the next day and a half.
Yeah.
Okay. So without further ado, I'd like to give an overview of the cost categories. So this starts with first the building systems, and you can see, I'll explain this on the first column here. These are the categories. The green column shows cost of each of these categories from the PSR. So when it was submitted, the actual date of the estimate is 8/20/2020, but this is from the PSR, and this was submitted as part of the PSR to the MSBA. The blue column you see here is the schematic design cost estimate that was done by PMNC. The purple column is also the schematic design cost estimate done by AM Fogarty. So these are 2 separate cost estimators, and this is how we review and do a reconciliation of the cost to make sure that these are in line.
One thing also to note is that between the PSR and the schematic design, that we've reduced the overall square footage by over 2,000 square feet. So I just want to make sure people are clear on that. So some things have been reduced from a square footage perspective as well.
Yep. Perfect. I think at this high level, I'm not going to go line by line, but this information is available to the public. So you will be able to look at this, and Mike, you can let us know if maybe the next meeting we could go line by line if necessary.
Yeah, and I just want to add, sorry, Leo, just one thing as we get into this. We've talked about this in the past in other meetings, and we've seen in the market there's a huge uptick in inflation over the first 6 months of this year, and so part of that led to significant differences in. I know it's been all over the news. You know, lumber was up 300%. Steel was up 80%, copper was up 75%. So largely due to the pandemic and some supply chain issues with that. That's sort of starting to level out a little bit. At least there's signs of that, so that's a good thing. Because ultimately, if this project does proceed, it won't even bid until next year. So as that market stabilizes, hopefully commodity costs start to go back to norms, and we don't end up with some of these big surges that we saw over the first couple of months of this year.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, that was my only question. Like that first line item, obviously there's a $1 million swing between the two estimates. And I was going to say, is there a particular reason for that? And, you know, because I'm sure other people would ask that question. So, you know, since these costs of people, obviously some folks are going to comb through these costs. And I think that's just a natural question to ask, including for myself.
That's a good question, Leo. I would say that there's sometimes like that, for instance, when you're looking at a A10 foundations line, there are two sublines. And when you look at them combined, they're pretty close. The reason is that some estimators will put certain costs in some buckets and some estimators will put them in other buckets. And so it's not always sort of clear, but you know, you sort of need to look at, there's far more detail than this that the design team and the OPM team get into that start to shake out, where making sure that the estimators are got their overall numbers lined up, but how they choose to assign categories sometimes is different.
I see. That makes sense. Great. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide here. And so what you'll see here from the previous page are the totals of the building construction. So you see it for each of these lines here. And then you'll see site work. So we're adding site work across 3 columns, and then the subtotal. So this is the subtotal of construction. And then you'll start to see the markups. So escalation, design contingency, those are subtotaled. And then we start to add in general conditions, general requirements, bonds, insurance. You'll see here that the permit fees are waived since this is the Medfield's own project. And then there's going to be GC's overheads and profits, which at the time, this was at PSR, this was added in here, and then we made an adjustment for a CMR fee, not knowing exactly if we were going to CMR or going to design bid build. But once that was decided, that dropped out, but the fees for the CMR are carried for SD. And so you'll see that reflected in both of these columns, the blue and the purple. One thing I'd like to note as part of the PSR, there were some ad alternates that were being considered. And at the time, decisions haven't been made yet, but we actually did make some assumptions that the water main pipe was going to be included, as well as some amount for traffic mitigation. So in the PSR, we actually included those 2 items. However, the ground source heat pump, the net zero component, we weren't certain yet. The SBC hadn't voted on that yet, as well as the playing field. So those 2 items were left out during the PSR. However, since then it had been voted and it was agreed that the playing field shall be captured as part of the project. And so we added those numbers that were provided during the PSR, and it gave us a total construction cost at the bottom here. So similarly, these are noted that it's included in the above, so it's all captured in the base estimate. And you'll see the totals below here as well. And some of these fine print down here is what Mike had mentioned before. Why you're seeing an increase in pricing is because of the market conditions currently. Any questions or any additional comments?
So, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, but so as part of this, when these estimates came in and the design team submitted to me the overall costs based on you know, where this project stood, basically I wasn't comfortable that we had done enough due diligence to make sure we're being as conservative as possible. So I asked them to go back and look at the design and find ways to reduce costs and present that. And I will say they have an extensive list which they put together, which was probably even far more than I was expecting. So thank you for that, Arrow Street and Left Field. But we have a list, and what we kind of did with the design team was take a first pass through, and I put on it sort of what I would suggest to be the low hanging fruit of ways that we should just make decisions now on to lower this cost. Because as we've noted all along, we're trying to be, fiscally conservative here. It's not a high profile building in town, and we want to make sure we're being responsible about where we're spending money, et cetera. So basically we took a first pass through and put a list together. We also need to make sure that we have that list moving forward should we see any other surprises in inflation, et cetera. So we always need to have in our back pockets potential for cost reductions. We want to make some decisions about, where this project should be right now before we ask the town to support it. So I don't know if you have that list, or was that next on your slides?
It is. Yep. Yep. No, great segue.
Perfect segue.
Exactly, into the value, what we call value engineering. For some of those who may not know what that means, is exactly what Mike had explained, is that once we get in the total cost, we start to look and compare, and we search, we comb through both the drawings as well as the cost estimate to understand where we might be able to optimize some of the values, as explained in these top bullet points here. So we're looking at alternates, we're looking at materials, methods, and this is not to take away any scope in the project, any programming. So the project still will function very well as intended and as planned and designed. And the following here are some recommendations. So we have reviewed this with the working group, as Mike had mentioned. And we had come up with 87 potential VE items. So it's a lot of VE items. If we were to add up all those items, it's about $5,878,000. With the working group, we have reviewed through all of these, and we had found 34 potential acceptable VE items, and that would total to about 2.8 million in savings. We still have 38 maybes that we can still consider, and potentially later on down the road if we find that we need to look for more savings. And then there are 15 no's that VE items that is not preferred at this phase, and maybe not even in the later phase. Any questions or comments? And this starts to look at, as I mentioned to you, there's the yes, no's, and the maybes. What we're trying to show here is that if we were to compare the PSR cost to the current SD estimate, we're over by 2.1%. So if you're looking at those two numbers that you saw from the first couple pages with the cost estimate, we're over about 2%. If we were to take all 87 VE items, which is very ambitious, and that usually never ever happens, but we go through it and we comb through it to see what potential items there are. But if we were to take them all, we would be below the PSR estimate by over 7%. But of the selected 34 recommendations of the VE items, we would actually be below the PSR estimate by about 2%, 2.2%.
Which, just to chime in on that, so the fact that we've had what we've seen is basically a 10% escalation over the last few months, and the fact that we potentially, if we just take what I would term low hanging fruit on the 34 recommendations and still be under where we were in the fall, to me, that seems like a win, because we're not affecting programming. We're not cutting anything that would change the function of the building should that occur. These are really just being smart about decisions about being smart about where we're spending money and how we're spending money, such that most of these may not be visible to anyone other than people, fully in the depth of the design documentation. So that's the goal with those recommendations, is to, at this stage, not cut any quote unquote bone, but really just to cut some fat and to try to, make sure we're being smart about it. And the other thing is, I wouldn't recommend ever getting to the point during schematic design where we're cutting everything that we can to get to a bare bones. I think that's a mistake in my mind, because there is a potential that, we may need to look at things elsewhere. And again, some of those items do affect function, and it's premature in my mind to start cutting that type of thing.
Great. Thank you, Mike. The next few slides starts to get into the details of each of these VE items. So I'm not quite sure if we want to, Mike, you can let us know if you want to get into that level of detail tonight.
It's 9:30, so I guess unless does anybody have objections? I know we're asking a lot of people right now, given what time it is. What's that, Tim?
Well, I just had to step away for a second. Did you go over the timing context? Like, when do we're not submitting the,
which is
he said until September, right, or something?
Yeah, and so Tina, you had sent sort of a timeline of sort of expectations. Do you have that in slide format, or?
I do. Yep. Let me see if I could try to skip to.
Because that's a good point, Tim, that, we can potentially table some of this stuff for further discussion rather than try to keep people awake as they start to fade off tonight. But I did want to present this stuff tonight, just so people sort of get a gauge for where we stand, because I know, and I'm well aware that the public has been anxious to see some of this information as well.
I mean, it seems to me that since we have until the end of August, that we, the point of having like Walt and me and you and others that have some experience with this, and Tom and all, is to kind of bring some of that to bear. And I didn't get a chance to go through it in any level of detail. I mean, it looked pretty acceptable, standard stuff that I've seen, stuff that frankly, people wouldn't even know is in there mostly. But I think it would be good if we could take some time and address this at a future meeting after people have had a chance to look at it, and the members of the committee can talk about the ones that they feel particularly concerned about. Otherwise, you're going to be explaining what it was, 30 something comments.
Yeah, and I don't think we need to go through each line item tonight, given where we are time wise, but I do think it'd be good just to outline this this schedule, Tina, and maybe we need to look at when we schedule our next meeting for and how that would interact here. So you want to walk us through this?
Yep. I'd love to. On the top here, you'll note there's some community conversations and forums set aside for each month. However, so this was assuming that maybe there were some decisions made on the VE, but if not, I think within these 4 weeks, if we were to meet in a couple weeks, we could still have those decisions made, and it would still give us time to make adjustments to the documents and adjustments to the cost estimate. And after that, that would allow us to provide a draft of the SD documents to the SBC. And that would give you, we were planning 2 weeks because it is going to be a lot of information, a little bit probably more than what you've seen in the PSR and the PDP. So it'll take time for you to really go through it and vet through it. And that would allow you to come up with a list of comments. We'd like to have a week for the design team and for left field to review those comments and be able to respond to them in writing. And then it brings us into mid-August at that time where we can review those comments and responses and any adjustments that needed to be made to the documents. And then that really brings us to 2 weeks later where it's the first week of September, where we would like to have a vote on the SD documents being submitted to the MSBA. And the deadline is September 8th. For submission of the SD documents.
So if we don't sort of proceed with all this stuff tonight, would you recommend that we get back together in a week or in 2 weeks? I guess if we're not able to get any sort of decisions to you tonight.
I think in 2 weeks would be sufficient. That I know that there's the holiday weekend coming up, not this weekend, but the following weekend. So I don't know if that's going to be in conflict with some people maybe taking vacations around that weekend. So the next
2 weeks
Wednesday.
would be July 7th.
Yep.
I mean, I think, we have, doing another one next week. There's still maybe people taking time off next week. I guess we're gonna have to deal with that with summertime. And I wonder if 3 weeks is too long. So, because I think we need to get you some clearer direction, so that you can incorporate those changes into the design documents. Just my take. I don't know if anybody feels otherwise.
I agree. I think 3 weeks would be too long.
Mike, is it possible to get approval on the ones that are currently marked as a yes tonight?
So there's 34 items to go through.
Okay. But they're
That's
pretty.
That's a lot to ask at 9:35.
Yeah, I mean, I would like a time just to read through it in
Yeah.
more detail. I mean, I would say I don't have the same eye that you all do, but I think it would be good to have a little bit of time with it. I'm happy to meet next week or the week after.
Does anyone else have a preference about if we do next week or the week after?
I'd prefer next week, but I'll make it work.
I guess it'll be easier for me too.
Anybody object to meeting on June 30th? Doesn't sound like it. So I say we move ahead with reviewing the VE list on the 30th.
And Tina or Gina, that VE list has been distributed to everybody in tonight's meeting package?
Yep.
It has, yep. And there was an update that was sent right before. So I think.
Right, you sent it, Tina. Yeah. So
yes, I just wanted to make sure everyone received it.
Yeah.
There was just a couple corrections and one more added item.
And also for the public, it is also on the project website. It's been posted to the project website.
Great.
All the documents.
Okay. One suggestion I would make, and has worked pretty well with other committees, is doing sort of a put a hold process. So we go through the list pretty quickly. People either speak up and say, I'd like to put a hold on that one, and we come back and revisit it, or people are generally in agreement or generally disagree. Kind of move through them pretty quickly in the beginning and then come back to the handful that there may be further discussion. So we're not, again, trying to slog through at a snail's pace for 30 some odd items.
You sound like Scott McDermott, our town moderator.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
when he goes through the budget.
Okay.
I agree. I think that's a good approach, Larry.
Yeah, because some of them are going to take some discussion, and others, it'll be easy to agree or easy to disagree.
Right.
Hey, Mike, can I just ask a question? I'll be the layman here. I think, you know, it's really important for, you know, Tim and yourself and to go through the details of it. But can you kind of summarize in layman terms what we're looking at in terms of, so there's three numbers there, the PSR and two estimates.
Yep.
And then, you know, there are under consideration reductions between 5.8 and 2.8 million. Can you just put that kind of quick, because I don't want, maybe these numbers will kind of get out in the wrong context.
Sure. No, that's fair, Bob. So what these are construction cost estimates. So this is just the construction, what we would call the quote unquote hard costs of the project. And this are the costs to basically build the building with a construction manager. And they're broken down by building industry standard systems in this format, what's called uniformat. Given, you know, basically as this is a very fluid process, you know, the designers evolve the design based on what they get feedback from us. They put that into the documents, the estimators then price that up. But then we kind of have a general overview of where the project stands. Ultimately, we need to, during this phase, we need to establish a project budget. And this is obviously the biggest factor in that budget, which is the construction cost. So we need to make some decisions, qualitative and quantitative, about, you know, what we believe this project should be. And sometimes that's even things like, you know, do we believe that the wall should be made out of brick, or do we believe it should be made out of metal? And all the pricing associated with that. So that's part of the whole process. And then, you know, basically based on where I saw the prices coming in, based on the what we've seen in the marketplace, the initial estimates that came in to me were too high, and that we needed to take a step back and really look hard at where we're spending the money, which is where that VE list comes in. And those are decisions that sometimes may be easy because they don't affect the function of the building, or they don't, and it's something that no one may ever see. And then there's less clear ones that may impact the function of the building, or may have a shorter lifespan, let's say, than another product or something like that. And then other VEs that are presented, we may feel are absolutely objectionable to the town. And so, because, you know, it changes the nature of how we deliver education or something like that, or how we want to maintain our buildings, and we're sacrificing too much by taking those VE items. So that kind of breaks down, and we'll develop that as a committee. You know, obviously I felt we needed to take a first pass, which is what, you know, I've done with the design and OPM team, and made some recommendations just about, you know, what I think, again, the green, I believe, are low hanging fruit. Some of those maybes may turn into yeses, or they may just stay on the maybe list. Anything that's not accepted still stays on the list for future phases, because we may need to revisit it. Something that, you know, we may not necessarily want to take right now. If something, ultimately, we're going to vote on a project in the fall that will have a set budget. And so when we do future cost estimating, if the costs go up more than we're estimating in terms of inflation, then we need to make up that somehow, because we have a fixed budget. So we then need to go back and look at how can we lower costs in other areas to offset the cost of inflation. So we always need to have that in our back pocket, that ways that we might potentially, whether we want to or not, may be forced into taking some cost savings in order to get us back to our fixed budget. So keeping in mind, and I get this is really confusing for the general public, is that these things are kind of fluid until we get to a point where we, as the SBC, have decided, you know, this is what we're comfortable presenting to the town, what we think is the best project, and here's what we think it should cost. That's sort of the process. I don't know if that answers your question, Bob, but
No, it's a great, so with the two estimates are by definition estimates, right? So they're guides, correct?
correct. So they're professional estimators. Both of them have extensive experience in schools. Matter of fact, both of them are on almost every single project, in one way or another. So they very much are closely tied to school projects, and they also track how projects actually come to bid out at the end. So they're starting to see trends in the marketplace based on where their estimates are versus where they ultimately end up from a bid perspective. Now, they are independent estimators. So one may say that a certain product is $10 a square foot and the other one may say 11. And ultimately that's why there's some differential between the two. And then reconciliation is really about making sure that they're both at least in agreement on the scope. Well, they may not always agree 100% on the price.
And what's the relationship between the estimate and what would be the final budgeted number? I mean, because does the estimate goes out to bid, or how does that work?
So the estimates are used, ultimately the designer's estimate takes precedent in schematic design. So that's the PM&C one that you see there.
Yep.
And so that is what we use to create our budget. And that is what we use to create the budget we present to the town for a vote. Ultimately, we've decided to proceed with a construction manager at risk approach to construction. So what will happen is as we get through into further stages, we will bring on a construction manager and basically the OPM's estimator, the AM Fogarty, will drop off, and we'll be using the designer's estimate and the construction manager. And the construction manager, since they're closely tied to the bid market, will be the estimate that we use as our basis. And they are getting feedback from certain strategic subcontractors throughout the process, so that they can get a gauge for where things stand. And then ultimately we get to a point where we're bidding the project to those subcontractors, and then those prices become real. Some may come in high, some may come in low. So there's a whole process around how we deal with that in what we call the buyout process. Ultimately, that's put together into what's called a guaranteed maximum price, or GMP, along with all sorts of qualifications, et cetera, that will serve as our final contract with the construction manager.
And the 703 and the 719 versus the 671. The 703, 719, that reflects current economic conditions.
Correct.
Off the pandemic. So if that stabilizes, how did that affect the 703 and the 719?
So in both estimates, and you can see there's a line item on here called escalation. Looks like there might be a typo, but to the midpoint of construction.
Yeah.
And so what that has done is that basically says that we believe in today's dollars, it's X, and then given that we're not bidding it for a year and a half, we think it's going to go up by this amount. So that's what that number is for. And as we get closer to that bidding point, the escalation number goes down, as well the design contingency number goes down, and it gets more baked into the base numbers. So if the marketplace suddenly stabilizes, some of those numbers may come down in terms of future escalation, which will help, again, stabilize it. But basically what these numbers are trying to tell you is that this is what they estimate it'll cost on bid day.
On bid day. So the 50,000, the 50 million and the 51 million, those would be at bid day. They won't be adjusted if the economic stabilizes or if the pricing stabilizes.
Again, we can't predict that. So right. the bids are going to be what they're going to be, right? We're going to put it on the street, and depending on what happens between now and then, prices may be more, they may be less. I think that's highly unlikely. never really seen prices go down. I've seen them stabilize, but even through multiple recessions, never seen huge decreases in construction costs. I have seen the rate of increase slow to, almost be flat. But so currently the estimates, according to this, are stating that on bid day, that's what they expect the hard bid cost of that 50 and 51. That doesn't include the other markups that you see below the line.
So those numbers are reasonably conservative in terms of, I don't let you put a crystal ball, but they seem to have a conservative element in terms of saying, because of today's pricing, and you get the markup is a pretty high number, 10% and the like.
If you look at it, Bob, a year ago, they were projecting 6% in the PSR, roughly. Now they're projecting 6% for 2 years, they were projecting basically 3% per annum, right? That's what that must have been, because we were always looking at a time frame like that. And now we're looking at 6% for just 1 year. So I think it's conservative, yeah.
Okay. No, I'm just trying to characterize it. Thanks. I don't want to ask too many questions. I know it's late, but I would add that by the reduction in that square footage, that your committee has already done, that you folks have already done, saves almost $1.7 million on the original cost. So even though the costs go up, they would have gone up by more if you haven't done what you've done. So it shows a lot of diligence. That's all. I just want to make that highlight.
Based on our other projects, this difference wasn't as severe as we've seen on, when you look at the bottom line, the 65 to the 68 or 69 or whatever, we were seeing more significant increases on other projects. And some of it is because we were able to reduce the square footage.
Right. No, thanks. I just, as a layman, it helped me. Thank you.
So again, I just to sort of reframe the conversation, I wasn't entirely comfortable with where this was coming out. So that's why I asked the design team to put that together, the detail. We'll go through that in detail at our next meeting. It'd be great if people have questions ahead of time and want to forward those. That'll help streamline the process as well. By all means, you can filter them through me. And I will make sure the design team and OPM team address as many as possible ahead of time, so we can recognize it does take some time to get through, 80 plus VE items. So rather than having another 3-hour long meeting, would be good if questions could come ahead of time. Any other thoughts, comments on the SD cost estimates, VE? Otherwise, we'll move along. We'll table that discussion further till next week. All right. If you have the agenda up, I think we were also going to do a design update. And I don't know if you probably want to table that too, Larry, to be able to have substantive discussion about it.
Yeah,
kind of feeling like we should end by 10 o'clock. So
looking at the look in people's eyes, I think we've sort of hit our we've hit the wall. So yeah, we could show that next week. We do have some interior view updates, which hopefully will get people excited after all the slogging through the numbers. But we can certainly table those rather than try and open them up for discussion at the moment.
Okay, Anna Mae, quick communications update.
Yeah, we'll solidify some dates for those community conversations for July and August, and we have Twitter and Instagram now, so we're getting up there.
And then Gina Lynn project schedule update. Obviously, we added an SBC meeting next week, but any other key things? We talked a little bit about the VE process dates, but anything else you want to touch on?
We had that slide up that pretty much laid out from now until the submission of the SD. I don't really have anything more to add to that. I don't know if you do, Gina.
No, I think that's fine, what Tina said. And I will have to update the milestones, but I think Tina captured it all for now.
Great, thank you. So open it up to the SBC for any other new business. All right, not hearing any. I'm going to not take any more public comment, given the time. We took a lot of it in the previous phase. So if anybody has any questions, they can send email. What's the email address again, Anna Mae?
Oh, excuse
Do you
me.
remember?
Yes.
Sorry, I should have it memorized by now, but I don't.
You think I would too? It's in that. Oh, you know what I would ask if people would.
I could
here it is.
share it on my screen.
Yeah,
thanks,
new
Tina.
elementary school project at gmail.com. New elementary school project at gmail.com.
So if you could send, if people have questions, they can filter that through that email address, and we'll try to get responses to you. But ultimately, anyone here certainly welcome to join us again next week. Again, it might be a bit of sausage making, but it's important discussions we're going to be having on the overall cost. So with that, what's that, Larry?
I was going to say, Tina, you got your calendar showing, so maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, did I share the wrong? I may have shared the wrong screen. Sorry, I was trying to share. Oh, here we go. I was trying to share this.
There we go.
Now,
there we go. Thanks.
You look very busy, Tina. Very busy.
Thank you.
I was going to say,
It's
she's got the holes there.
It was nice to see her actually scheduling focus time. I wish I was more diligent about that.
If I was trying to get anything done, I need to.
Yeah, I hear you.
And I'd encourage you folks to ask your friends to sign up for our emails. You know, we've had a good big bump, but so we'd like more. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. With that, thank you again for your patience, everyone, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Anna Mae.
A motion from Anna Mae. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Mike Marcucci. Running around the list. Mike Marcucci.
Yep.
Tim Bonfatti.
Yes.
Tom Erb.
Yes.
Walt Kincaid.
Yes.
Anna Mae O'Sheabrook.
Yes.
Leo Brem.
Yes.
And Mike Quinlan also votes yes. Thank you all again and have a great night.
Have a great
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mike.